Hello and welcome to episode 64 of the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Daniele Fiandaca. Daniele, it's an absolute pleasure. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Very good.
Good.
Lovely to start my year with this conversation.
Yes, new year, same podcast as everyone that should be listening. But yes, as always, Daniele, in your own words, what makes you a man?
Really interesting question because I just think about it. I've been thinking about it a lot in that, does my identity need to be encapsulated by being a man? I suppose that's my big question. Am I a man or am I just a human being um, who was born as a man, but do I need to be a man going forward? I suppose that's the question I have more than anything else. I'd actually much rather be defined with what a good human being is as opposed to what a good man is. Obviously, we can't ignore the fact of how we were born. We have chemicals within ourselves that make us different. Men specifically have far more testosterone, which does cause a lot of the issues that we have around the world and a lot of the issues that men face. So we can't ignore it. But I suppose I'm much more interested, just to turn the question around, what makes me a good human being. And obviously I do talk about masculinity, I do talk about men, but I do also want to focus on the kind of traits that make us good human beings more than what them make us good men.
For sure. I mean, one of the big things that I'm trying to do is redefine masculinity, which I think is something that you're very much open to and very much sort of open to have this conversation with. I think the answer to the question is what you want it to be, right? I think that's sort of the idea. I think the reason I ask it in that frame is men in general tend not to ask that question to themselves. It seems to be sort of the last thing that they would consider asking.
Yeah. And I think for me, looking at some of the research, it was interesting. I looked at some research from last year, just yesterday, on how many people saw masculine men as a negative thing, and I'm like going, what does that mean? I mean, if a man's really masculine but is still emotionally available, is still compassionate, is still that's how they, that's what makes them happy. That's what makes them comfortable in their own skin. I think the challenge that we have, which is why this question is important and masculinity is important, is we do have a whole set of boys and young men that are coming through that are really struggling with this question and really struggling what their purpose is. Because if we think about history, and we do have to look at history, if you look at historically, it was a man's role to provide. It was a man's role, and that's partly, the physicality of it, the type of jobs that existed. It was a man's role to protect. Again, come back to that physicality. But we don't live in that world anymore. And I think there's a lot of people who are trying to put us back into that world. Let's be really clear. We have an incoming US president, I think, would more than happily put us back into that world, but that's not the world we live in anymore. So I think for me, understanding what that means for men and our roles, I think, is really, really important.
I think for sure there's been a huge shift in gender roles as a whole over the last 20, 30 years, which is arguably just a generation, not even, maybe not even a generation, some people might argue, but there has been a huge shift for sure. I think this is a really nice point to sort of let people know what it is that you actually do in the space. That would be great to hear.
Yeah, so I founded something called Token Man a decade ago, really as a initiative to engage men with inclusion, equity, and diversity, and to support them, and when they're ready, to inspire them to become better allies and agents of change. No minority in history has ever affected change without support of the majority. And while women clearly aren't in the minority in the world, unfortunately, they still are in many industries and positions of power. And so what we do need is we need to engage those senior men to actually create that change. Within that, I think my journey's been an interesting journey. I've been on my own learning journey. I did it as it initially was Token Man was kind of a side project, but it just took up so much of my life, it killed my business. So I had to pivot my career 8 years ago. So I moved from advertising to becoming inclusion diversity consultant. But even in my focus and the work that I do has shifted within those 8 years. So I used to run a business called Utopia, which is a culture change business. It still exists. It's still a brilliant business. Very proud of it. But 2.5 years ago, I left there simply because, and I actually the first thing I did was I trained to become a coach, because I saw the male leaders that I'd worked with weren't moving as far as I believed they needed to move to be truly inclusive. And so that's when I trained to become a coach. And a lot of the work that I do now is actually focusing on working with senior leadership teams on inclusive leadership. So that's everyone. That's male, female, and everything in between. And then I also do quite a lot of work with men specifically. So that will be on male allyship. That will be just running brave spaces for allow them to have conversations they wouldn't normally have. And also as part of that, it's really interesting. I open most of my men only spaces with the feelings wheel exercise. I copied affectionately. I talk about it quite a lot, but from Josh Connolly. So I'm part of something called Uncommon Man London. Meets every month using breath work, really, to get people to open up, to actually just be better men and speak to other men.
So I attended a brave space. That was something that I did last year. Feelings wheel is something that I have never done. I have mixed feelings about using a feeling wheel. But I guess for the listener, can you explain what a feelings wheel is?
We are going to come back to your mixed feelings, because I think that is. So a feelings wheel is fundamentally a wheel which starts in the middle. So it takes kind of what I'd call the kind of core feelings like happy, sad, angry. But what it does, it goes further. If you say I'm angry, there's often something behind that anger. So what is it that it might say, for example, you might be angry because you've been slighted. And so what the feelings wheel does, it helps you to go actually deeper. And what psychology has shown is that in just naming a negative feeling, you can reduce the impact of that feeling by 30%. So in understanding and naming those feelings has a really positive impact. Obviously, I use it because I get men to reconnect with their feelings, but also have conversations they wouldn't normally have. So come to your mixed feeling on the feelings wheel.
Well, I'm a man, and I've don't want to talk about my feelings. So yeah, it's interesting. I struggled to even pick the inner one, if I'm honest, because it wasn't right that second. It was sort of around that day, I think, was the sort of concept, or that week of a feeling that you'd had. But I think in the moment, maybe that would be more useful. I think I used it after, which you'll be impressed of, to sort of literally do what you said, that psychological brain trick, in the sense of, if you could name it, it should feel slightly better. But yeah, that's sort of where my mixed feelings come from. It is like using it, but then what's next? I think for me, activity and sort of proactiveness towards things is how I view the world, and I think a lot of men like to do that as well. It's great talking about one's feelings, but what does that actually mean? What's the next steps? How do I sort of get out on it? I think if you talk about being sad all the time, you are inherently just going to be sad. It's what's the next step, and what do you do with that information, I guess, is why I have mixed feelings with it.
Yeah, and listen, I can answer that one, because I do it in I'm running a male allyship program right now. I'm looking for my next cohort. So if anyone's interested, please get in contact. But they actually, so the male allyship program is 7 sessions, and so you can just see the movement from the first session, where some people are struggling, as you say, even to note it. So by the 3rd session, I'm actually making it slightly easier for them, and harder to have a conversation. But I say to them, think of a time that made you feel really uncomfortable. what was the feeling you were feeling then? So I actually start going deeper, and what they actually find that easier, because actually that's a real, they can really identify that moment. They can really go onto that feelings and understand it. I think what happens is, firstly, you build connections so much quicker. People really do feel connected to each other. They feel much more comfortable. They feel much more, it's not just about naming that feeling, but actually talking to someone about that feeling lightens your mood. So I agree with you. Talking about being sad the whole time would dampen any mood, but actually be able to talk about why you're really happy. What was it that made you happy? What was it, is it because you're proud? Is it because of this? Is actually even naming those things can also increase your happiness, and and get people to understand why you're feeling how you're feeling. I think for me, if I look at my personal relationships and my friends, because I have got much better at identifying my feelings. Let's be really clear. When I first used the feelings wheel, I was rubbish at. My wife always said to me, "How are you?" And I always said, "Okay." She said, "I need to get the feelings wheel to you." She should have done it, because actually it does make it so much easier. But in speaking my feelings with my friends, I know we've opened up much better conversations, and we now talk about stuff. And some friends I've opened up more than others, and I've just seen the difference in the quality of the friendship and the connection. So I can see it in my personal life firsthand, but also with all the people, all the men that I work with, they all say the same thing. It provides a connection that they've often never had with on their colleagues at work.
What are the other what are the benefits for men doing it that may never have done it before? You're obviously talking longer term when you mention about your relationships with friends, etc. But what about that initial sort of starting point for a man?
Listen, I'm working. I work with a lot of friends, and one of my friends is doing a lot of work as an ally. So he very much positions as an ally, but he has said he does, and he's a 100% empath. He's a natural empath. I wouldn't say I'm a natural empath. I'm definitely not a natural empath. But he has said he worries for men. Yeah, and I agree with him. And what he's talking about is he worries for men in terms of their roles in the future. And he's talking specifically about work. And I'm starting to see it with men who, of my peer group, men who have lost their jobs, who can't get another job, who I find it very hard to understand how they can get back in that role. And the quote that I love more than anything, and actually I would say it saved our business when we went into lockdown, because we lost all our income overnight when we went into lockdown, was at Utopia, was a quote by Alvin Toffler. And he said, "The illiterate of the 21st century are not those who cannot read or write. It will be those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." And when I start looking at leadership, if I start looking at the skills that you need in the workplace, I've had to do a lot of learning, unlearning, and relearning. Okay. And I think if we look at the future of leadership, the future skills that people need, there is a lot of taking on far more of those feminine, what have been traditionally feminine skills. And part of that unlearning and relearning is having uncomfortable conversations. And talking about your feelings is just another example of having an uncomfortable conversation. Initially, I don't find it uncomfortable anymore, but that's taking a lot of training, a lot of learning, a lot of being understanding and seeing how actually vulnerability has created more connections for me than anything I ever could have had. I post nearly every day on LinkedIn. I did that lot over the last 12 months, and I've had, so childlessness is something I never thought I'd be talking about, but I do now talk about childlessness simply because me and my wife are childless, and it has had impact on us as individuals, but also as a couple. But I just couldn't believe the response I got in terms of just people saying, "We've never heard a man talk about this." Yeah, and all of a sudden opening that space and that room for other men to talk about it, I think is just so powerful.
So if we look at the extreme of this, a lot of men sort of hold, I guess, true to them that talking about their emotions or their feelings is going to make them extremely vulnerable. Their wife is going to leave them, is going to take the kids, you're going to lose your job, all of these things like this, the pure toxic side of what masculinity looks like is this is the fear, right? If you talk about all of these things, it is the end of you as a man. You'll lose all your respect from your peers, etc., etc. Just to touch on something, you mentioned that with some of your friendship groups, you'd opened up less. So is there a way of sort of, I guess, alleviating that or stepping through that process?
I think that, listen, the reality is I'm going to tell you a little story, and I don't know whether it'll fit, but fundamentally I run something called Masculinity the Workplace every year. We've just done 7 years worth. For those that I don't, we've talked about it yet, but I paint my nails now. My nails are always nearly. I'm going to the nail salon this afternoon, actually, and I'm training to become a nail technician. So I'm the co-founder of Hard as Nails, which is a movement to encourage men to paint their nails for at least a week, not forever, but at least a week, to encourage conversations about gender identity, masculinity, and mental health. We've already done we're now on the second part of the pilot, which we're trying to recruit 200 men. So I paint my nails the whole time, but also I am on a mission to break stereotypes and to test stuff, and and just to show how ridiculous stereotypes can be. And I wanted to wear a skirt for only the second time at Masculinity in the Workplace, and my co-founder said, "I'm uncomfortable with you wearing a skirt. I don't know why. I don't know what my bias is, but I'm going to come back to you." She then came back to me and she said, "Listen, the reality is those men in the room, we need to take them on a journey. And what I'm worried about you wearing a skirt is they see you and they see something that is just so far either different to them or so far evolved in terms of where masculinity needs to be to that you lose them without you even speaking." And I said, "You're 100% right. Yeah, I'm not going to wear a skirt, but I am going to ask during the event whether people want me to close the event wearing a skirt." I wasn't feeling 100%. I didn't have the energy because I need to have the energy to be able to do that. So I didn't do that. But my point is that for her, that was going too far. And so for me, what I'd always say on these things are journeys, and they're actually a journey that doesn't happen all of a sudden. You don't jump overnight. And so what you need to do is you need to test stuff with people. Another example of that is I spoke to James, who's the founder of Sanctus, and he talked about, Sanctus talks a lot about mental health. He talked about struggling with his friends to talk about mental health. And whenever he talked about mental health, they shut down. So he started changing his language and he started talking about "my battery's dead. And this is the impact it's having on me." And what he found after a couple of months is one of his friends would say to him, "My battery's dead." And that opened up a discussion for him to have around mental health without calling it mental health. And that meant he started having different conversations. So I think for me, I think that friendship group, one of my friendship, isn't quite ready for it yet. We haven't spent enough time, but it will happen. It will change. I think when it comes down to it, everyone's at a different part of their journey. And I think in all the work that I do, I talk a lot about meeting men where they are on their journey. I think we have to also do the same with the people around us. For some people, talking about your feelings can be really, really hard. I think to your point, though, I think the thing that people are most scared of is Pandora's box. So once you open it, you can't close it again. And there is an element of that. And I think people are scared of going to therapy for that reason, is once they start talking, it's gonna collapse. And also your point around, as I said, I'm a part of a number of networks. I'm not going to say which network it is, but I do hear in one of the men's networks I'm part of, men going, "When I'm vulnerable with my wife, she can't handle it. She doesn't know how to deal with it."
Yeah.
So when we think about society is just not used to men sharing their feelings often, so those things will take time. So I don't think it's I'm lucky I've got an amazing wife who has supported me and encouraged me throughout this whole journey. But not everyone has that. And so I think for me, it's understanding at what pace you need to go to open up and allow other people to see a different route.
I think that's, for me, that's the really important part. It's where my frustrations come out the most with men need to talk, is that I believe men do need to talk. I do believe men should talk. I just think men need to understand who they can talk to first, because, like you say, not everyone is receptive. Not everyone can deal with these things, because without, like, I guess, treading lightly, some shit men go through is pretty intense. Like, to put that onto someone else, the thoughts that are in some men's head is actually quite scary. Is like, from the men I've spoken to, for sure. It's definitely there. So it's an interesting balance. I think where this sort of ties in quite nicely, though, I guess, is the work that you do with allyship. So I have some interesting thoughts on allyship. I have some interesting topics that I want to bring up on it. But why don't you explain, just sort of briefly, what it is that you try and do with men to get an understanding of allyship and sort of the DEI space that sort of sits in?
Yeah, so the people that sign up I've obviously already said I want to do more. So they recognise, if you think about the workplace, they don't necessarily see all the things but they recognise that for women and other historically marginalised staff, the day-to-day of work is much harder. Okay, and so they understand the barriers exist, and that we do need to provide equity, and that equity is really important, and that we do need to provide support. Saying that, I've been very proud of the male allies. The first thing we do is we define allyship, right? And both groups, partly because those groups do come to me through me, so they would have heard of me speaking about this, so it's not like they've just done it from nothing. But my definition of allyship isn't the traditional definition of allyship. So the traditional definition of allyship is helping historically marginalized groups, and I think that's part of the problem. It's just so narrow, because by that definition, a woman couldn't help me, for example. I'm not an historically marginalized group, yet in all the work that I do, the people who have been my biggest allies have been women. Okay, or it means that I can't support the person that looks exactly like me, that's wife has just left them, they've lost custody of their kids, and they're really struggling with their mental health right now. So under the definition, that's not being an ally. Okay, that might be being a friend, but it might be a colleague, right, who needs that allyship right now. So the first thing we do is we talk about the definition that I think the second cohort did was historically marginalized groups and those that need support. So it's the and. It's not it's an and. And then all we really do is we start to explore what allyship looks like. So that is firstly by getting them to go and speak to people within the organisation, either women or from an historically marginalised group, get them to understand what exclusion looks like, what it feels like, what they could do to actually make a difference, what the system, why is the system broken? We then look at systems, and it's a group coaching program. So, it's really interesting. Even though I'm a specialist in this area of male allyship, I don't do any content on live. I just give them reading. And my job actually as a coach is just to facilitate the conversation. They're learning off each other and off the content that I've curated for them. We look at, I'm just thinking of the modules, we look at positive masculinity. We look at what does that mean? What does that look like? We look at how we look at interventions. So what do interventions look like? And so there's about 6. We look at vulnerability. We look in specifically into vulnerability. What's stopping? What's getting in the way? What can we do differently? And the final one is we just get them to have that. They've all got a sheet, an allyship sheet, which they all complete, which commits what they're going to do to be better allies to people within the workplace, but also recognizing that equity, that means that some people will need more support than others, and that often is women and other historically marginalized groups. So it still is looking at them being allies to it's just also recognizing that sometimes there may be other people we need support and be allies to.
Yeah, I like the and part of it. That's probably puts a little bit of damp on my fire, but I guess for me, the word allyship, I find it quite aggressive almost. I find it like that means there's a war and that we need to be on their side. And that for me is probably my first issue with sort of allyship, is the sense of why is it used in that terminology? I think the way that you sort of dilute it and say, and any of those that need support, that makes sense, right? But the word allyship for me seems naturally aggressive.
I don't. So first, a couple of things to pick up. Firstly, one of our events 3 years ago was we have a steering committee from people within business. So it is used in relation to all the work that I do is in relation to business. So Brave Spaces, even the Brave Spaces I run, I run Brave Spaces about being a father in the workplace, right? I don't run Brave Spaces about being a father. I'm not a father, but I can do one around being a father in the workplace. So the first thing to say is that we talked about beyond allyship, and all the organisations says the same thing. There's too much. Allyship's actually really helped us get more men involved. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's there. It exists. Secondly, I just want to pick up on your question on the war. In some areas, it is a war. Do you know what? When it comes to the trans rights, it is a war right now. And it feels like one. And unfortunately for those people who are trans, it's horrible. It's horrendous. They are under attack constantly. So actually, if I'm a trans ally, and actually it couldn't be more appropriate for that particular case. So I do get your point, but I do think there are elements of which you say, actually, there is a reality. And even if we look at gender, how gender rights are being attacked in the States. There's a war there as well. So I actually, funny enough, unfortunately, I don't want to, my job is to bring people on journey. So, it's funny, I'll write something in the next couple of weeks on being an activist. I kind of talk about being what's the word? I don't like to call myself an activist because my experience of activists is actually a lot of the time, and they're so important. Let's be really clear there. But my experience is most of them tend to lead from hurt rather than leading from heart. And when you're leading from hurt, actually you raise the issues, but what you do is you also create disconnection. My job is to reconnect. So I like to be seen as that bridge. And so for me, understanding that and understanding how we bring people on the journey, I think is really important.
So again, I think and those that need our support is, again, diluting what I'm saying. But in general, this is sort of where this view stands in the majority. That's your definition. I'm talking about the definition as a whole. So the other one is sort of ties back into what you said. Sure, there are most definitely trans issues, as there are issues across all the other sides of that as well. But the counter argument to that is that there's now these issues for men, as we've sort of already discussed. There has been a huge shift in what society means for a man. We've huge rise in the feminist movement that's allowed for equality within the workplace. Still huge sort of stigma that needs to be done, but from a legal point of view, everything is sort of on par from that point of view, and that is now putting pressure onto men. But when it comes to sort of DEI, they are not included in the inclusivity part. So again, that's sort of the next bit on the fire. But you have your say on it.
No, listen, I say this, my business time of the year is weird for me coming to January because I've got to wait. A third of my income comes in November. So I've got to wait 11 months for me to be really, really super busy again. I mean, it's, and I think it's telling. One, I don't get as much, and actually I'm relatively busy on International Women's Day. People do see the value of men actually speaking on International Women's Day to bring other men on that journey. But National Inclusion Week, I didn't get a single call. It's called National Inclusion Week, and you're not including the people who are in the best position to create change. So you're 100% right, and we see it across the whole board. I think the problem we've got, what I'm seeing is the challenge we're getting is, so let's take male violence against women and girls. I know a few men who are campaigning for female violence against men.
Yeah.
And I understand it, and they're right. I mean, if you look at the number of incidents, and this shocked me, and given the work I've got to do, I'm learning the whole time. But across the world, there are as many domestic complaints of female violence against men as there are men against women. But I see those same people equating it as if they're the same thing, which they just completely lose my respect. They lose any kind of credence. The violence against the male violence against women versus they are at different levels. Doesn't mean they're at different levels. So for me, I'll come back to that word again. It's not a but, it's an and. Yeah. This is we've got to tackle male violence against women and girls, and we need to make sure that the other violence, the other way round, is not totally ignored and is not totally silenced by the amount of volume on this side. And I think for me, that's where we've got to right now. Is I do see a lot of people frustrated, and again, leading with hurt, of men who are going, but what about us? What about us? What about us? And I'm like, you're right. I understand your frustration, but don't go into where people are discussing other issues and go, but what about men?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't add.
Nothing winds me up more than the sentence, what about? And then something else for sure. I definitely agree with you on that. I would really love to get your opinion on this, right? So with the Me Too movement, out of the rise of that came Not All Men. And obviously a similar sort of voice was heard when it was the man versus bear.
Yeah.
And obviously you're working directly with businesses, sort of having these conversations openly. Do you think that there should be a shift in the tone of voice? Because what a lot of men, and what I'm hearing from a lot of men, is that they feel attacked. So this is where these sort of things come from. So it's like, don't do this, don't rape, don't beat women, and the majority of men are going, I know this, you're talking to me like a child. And over time, that creates resentment and arguably is more likely to create someone who's going to commit violence than someone who maybe is having a different conversation. What's your
answer? Yeah, I mean, listen, I'll send you, I'm assuming you've got show notes. I'll send you a few LinkedIn posts I've done, because the answer is categorically yes. The narrative has to change. And I think one of the visuals that I used was, I'm going to give you a visual that I use, which I think is probably better than another analogy I was given, which I will share. But it's what we find in change. When we think about performance in the workplace, we know from studies that the best, if you want someone that's working with you to perform their best, the ratio between positive praise and constructive feedback should be 5-1.
Okay.
So 5 times more praise than feedback. I have been in a job where I don't think I got any positive feedback, and all I got was constructive feedback constantly, and it really had such a damaging impact on my mental health, and I ended up leaving that role. So I've felt it, I've seen it, I've seen the impact. If we think about men, and if we take the carrot and stick, it feels like, I think for me, and especially when you think about someone leaning in to become a male ally, or leaning in to try, it's kind of like the best way that we're going to get positive movement is carrot, stick, carrot, stick. If I'm going to take it in what it feels like right now for most men is stick, carrot, sticks. And we're wondering why those men aren't moving. We're wondering why those men are pushing back. And that's how it really feels to me. And I think you just need to look at how charged the space can be. I had a post that went viral last month, and it really went viral. And I had as many people disagreeing as people just vehemently, literally. I'd become the most horrible man in the world because I suggested that the term male, pale, and stale, when describing, and it was called Words Matter, and I didn't use my words well enough, but when describing senior leadership teams, people think male, pale, and stale is something that's okay. It's not. When you're talking about systems, and I've come to learn in America, it's really important that we use that term at a systemic level, because it's true, and I do agree with that. But when you're talking about at a board level, or talking about at senior leadership level, actually insulting the very people that can make that change is not helpful. So I think you're 100% right. We do need to change the language. I think if we look at someone like Caitlin Moran, she wrote I can't remember what the title is, but she's one of the few feminists that has started to look at men's issues and actually started to recognise that men actually do have their own challenges. And hopefully at the beginning, I think hopefully you heard me, but I do talk about supporting men and when they are ready, helping them become better allies and agents of change. If I support a man, it's not conditional on them becoming an ally and agent of change. I think that's really important. Some men right now, all they need is support, and they may need support for the rest of their lives. And they're not ready to step in. Their lives are just too complex, too much going on. And actually, I do find some of the narratives quite condescending, because the narrative is that, my God, men have it so easy. Our lives are so easy. We don't have any issues. We don't have any challenges. No. My brother didn't die 12 years ago. That was easy. My dad having Alzheimer's. No, that doesn't have any impact on me. All of these things that people just don't see, and just they make these assumptions because of what you look like and what you represent.
Yeah, as a white straight male, I'm privileged. I am the most privileged human to have ever walked the planet. But I get it. I understand where all of this comes from. I understand where it is. But for me, it's just bringing light to male issues. It's allowing men to be men in spaces that they feel comfortable being men, whatever that looks like for them on whatever spectrum it can be. And I think a man with purpose and drive and community is never going to even consider committing a crime of such nature. I think it would be completely implausible.
That's not the point. That I don't. So not all men. I hate not all men. I hate it. I hate it because, and I am an advocate of yes all men, because fundamentally, I can see it. Not enough men are doing enough to change the system. So we are all complicit with the society in which we operate, in which most women feel unsafe to walk the streets at night. That's not society that I want to be in. And so while I understand the impact of saying that, I still believe that most men need to do more. And we do have male privilege, and let's be really clear, we have male privilege in context. So I hear people banning about, well, you've got male privilege. And I'm like, well, if I'm sitting in a custody court separating from my wife, what privilege do I have at that point? So there are elements, but when it comes to safety, I think every man does have a responsibility to themselves, to their partners, to their nieces, nephews, daughters, whichever one you want to cut it. Is society right now means that just too many women feel unsafe, and we need to change that.
What are some small steps towards that? What's the simplest things?
So I think little things like getting braver at calling out, calling in. I think it's not easy. That's why interventions is one of the male allyship sessions. We look specifically. We use things like the 5Ds framework. So look at just type in bystander intervention 5Ds. You can read about that framework. I think speaking to women around you in terms of what it feels like, what you can do to support them. I think if you work in a workplace, most workplaces are sexualized in some kind of way, and understanding how we can desexualize that. I did a piece of research with Harriet Whaley Cohen, and we actually found that 40% of women said they knew someone in their organization whose inappropriate behavior was known but tolerated. 40%, that's 4 in 10 women. And so understanding that, asking the women, who are these people, and actually help support what can change. Really simple thing like, I worked with an organization, and clearly office parties were a problem. Women did not feel safe at those office parties, and that's it's most businesses that's the case. So one of the things they did as a collective is they created some kind of rules for code of conduct for events, and guess what? loads of men complained. They went, "Oh my God, this is the fun out of it." But the women went to the big event once a year. They all felt safer. And that's much more important than a man moaning, "Oh my God, we've taken all the fun out of things." And so I think that's the shift that needs to happen, is
Yeah.
just men taking responsibility and saying, "Okay, what can I change? What can I have influence over?" But often that will mean asking the women first. And often that may mean having some uncomfortable conversations, because as men, we can never, ever, ever, ever say with 100% certainty we haven't made a woman feel uncomfortable at some point in our lives. And that's a reality. And there's no point in, we need to, as we do our own work, we need to recognize what those things might be. But shame actually isn't a great thing. It doesn't help us move forward. So it's about understanding that behavior so we don't do it again, so that we can call out other men doing it. I mean, I love what Mayor of London did with mate, the whole campaign they did, which is about, just saying to your mates, going, "Mate, come on, that's just not good
Yeah.
language." And it was, even though a lot of people said, "Well, mate didn't work for them," you're like, no, but that's the point. You find a language that actually works for you, just to
Yeah.
be able to say "You're being a bit of a prick right now." That's really, really uncalled for.
Yeah, I think one thing that I'm really thinking about is based on the Brave Space that I attended of yours, and I'm happy to share this story. Is around WhatsApp groups, and obviously the big thing at the moment is the 40,000 men in this other text chain of how to abuse,
I know.
do XYZ, right?
Yeah.
So sort of looking at it as a domino effect. So we as men, it's okay to be attracted to women. It's okay to talk about women in a way that you go, "I'm attracted to this person, and that's what I
Yeah.
find
Yeah.
attractive about them." But there are lines and there are things that start as small in, say, a WhatsApp group that you're in, but they might be the worst in your WhatsApp group, but they might be the tamest in the next WhatsApp group. And it's looking at that chain and sort of going, well, if they're able to say that here, they're going to feel more comfortable in this group, and that's going to build that. And then in that group, that's going to have a top person. And then all of a sudden, you got 40,000 men in another group somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what I was sort of.
Yeah, and the thing the thing that I would say, we talked about man versus bear, and again, I'll send you some links on that. The thing
Yeah.
that I would say, the same thing to men, is just listen to what women are saying, and actually, the majority of them are saying bear. Understand that. If you can understand that, you're going to see the world differently.
Yeah. I mean, there's a nuance to it for sure. And I think I recently had a conversation with my friend who lives in Canada, and he explained about bears. If they are choosing bear, then maybe because I wouldn't choose a bear ever, based on the conversations I had with him. Let's put it that way. So
it does depend where you are, but I had the opposite. I had people actually saying that bear is always going to be the safest anyway, as long as you're not attacking it. But as I said, in Canada, bears might be a bit more aggressive.
Yeah, well, there's what. Well, that's the thing. Was the bear brown or grizzly? This is the.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So yeah, was it peak summer? Has it just woken up from hibernation?
I watched the film, or is it just taking a snort of cocaine? If you saw Cocaine Bear, you wouldn't want to be with that bear, trust me.
Yeah, there was a lot missing from that meme for sure, especially on the bear, because it was shown so much. It wasn't Winnie the Pooh though. I think that was fair to say.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, in your opinion, what is doing really well in the space right now, and what do you want to see more of going into 2025?
I think we're seeing more recognition of so things like that. Andy's Men's Club, for example, has done so much for supporting mental health and getting men to speak more openly and share those feelings. I think there are people like Josh Connolly, who's talking quite a lot about resilience, but also he's, Uncommon Man London with Rob and Mark. I think they've done an amazing job with that. These are obviously, Uncommon Man London is 30 people each time, but now that's, there's probably 120, 150 men. That then has a ripple effect, right? Because those men then go out and might have different conversations. I obviously run Brave Spaces. My resolution for, I don't think I've had one ever sell out. When I say sell out, they're free, but I've never had one fill up. I've actually got the fathers in the workplaces. When I just looked this morning, it's in February. It's in the end of this month, and it's already 17 out of 20. So I cap it at 20. My next step is once I hit 20, I then need to make sure that men actually turn up, because that's the other thing that men don't do, is they don't prioritize. So that they don't see something like this that's actually feels much more. And this is the interesting point, right? Is I think a lot of men do not look after themselves. Funny enough, they often are prioritizing others, even though it might not look like that. Is actually often they are, and what I think, or they're prioritizing either others or they're prioritizing career. And the one thing I would say is the Masculinity of the Workplace 2 years ago, Susie Orbach, who's a famous psychoanalyst, she said something that's just always stuck with me. And she said, I see too many men on stilts who are hollow inside. And what she was talking about is men, and I've seen this from personal relationships, men who get to the top, have worked all of the, everything's gone into getting to that position on the board, either a CEO, whatever position that is, and then all of a sudden realized that that's not the most important thing in the world. And actually a lot of those, and for some, the most important thing which they come to realize is their relationship with their children. They've just lost 94% of the chance of them having that relationship with their children, because there's a scary stat that says that once a child hits 18, parents have spent 94% of their time they will ever spend with them. So you don't get that time back. And so for me, what I would like, if I was going to do one thing this year, and I don't know how to, you're helping me set my objectives, I'd like to redefine success for men. I'd like to have more conversations about what success really, truly is for men.
Awesome. Daniele, it's been an absolute pleasure. Could talk to you for days, and I'm sure we will in the future. But I will leave the final thoughts with yourself and let people know where they can find you if they want to hear.
Yeah, just find me either on LinkedIn. I'm extremely active there. Post most days. TokenMan.org. You can get access to all the Brave Spaces. They should all be there at the top of the page. And if you're a client and you want to do some more inclusive leadership with your senior leaders, or engage your men better, then get in touch with me, tokenman.org/consulting.